the iCloud photo hack, in which a couple of years ago, when Apple started syncing everybody's photo libraries to the cloud, there were targeted attacks against women to expose their private photos online through this iCloud backup service. And this is an example of weaponized design, not because of the hack itself, but rather that there was no informed consent given by people using their iPhone devices or iOS devices.
Hello and welcome to episode 105 of the Digital Mindfulness Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Ampofo, and joining me today is Cade from the Tactical Technology Collective. In this episode, we talk about the work of the organisation in raising awareness of technology, human rights and civil liberties. Also, we're going to be talking about the prevalence of weaponized design and also the steps that you can take to become more aware of your digitized life by making use of their free data detox toolkit. But before we begin, welcome to the show. Here in the Digital Mindfulness Podcast, we bring you the best teachers and thought leaders from around the world to discuss how time well spent digitized experiences can help to improve human society and the world at large. If you're new to our show, then the very best place to find out much more about us is to visit digitalmindfulness.net, where you can find a collection of some required listening shows where we discuss everything from digital wellness to persuasive technologies, behavior design, and much, much more. So enjoy this episode with Cade from the Tactical Technology Collective. Cade, thanks so much for coming onto the show today and being a part of Digital Mindfulness. I'm really looking forward to you sharing more about what you're doing at Tactical Tech and also the work that you're doing with the data detox. So welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, Cade, why don't you share with everyone who you are and particularly how you came to be working with Tactical Tech?
So, Tactical Tech today exists as we're a non-profit that out of Berlin. We exist between the intersection between technology and the human side of technology. Traditionally, we work a lot with information security and a lot around the sort of early structure. It's been around for 15 years, and traditionally we had been working a lot within with human rights groups and things like that to really work on digital security and raise awareness. But as our organization has grown, we've started to branch out into other areas. And so today, Tactical Tech's mission is sort of to look at the issue of consent with technology and how people relate to technology, and then empower people through awareness raising and through trainings and through a number of other initiatives to empower themselves to antagonize for change within technology, and also to use platforms and tools and devices in ways that really benefit them.
I think this is a really important mission, Cade, and particularly so because given all of the stories that have come out recently about data breaches and privacy, and particularly how a lot of companies would say that people in general don't really care about their privacy or personal privacy, that they just prefer to actually use the apps and services that they wish to use. I think that what you're doing at Tactical Tech is incredibly important.
Yeah, so we have a number, as I mentioned before, we have a number of outreach programs. The one that I work on is the Data Detox Kit, where I'm the project lead. The feedback that we've had, I think there's the discussion around Facebook and the continued use of Facebook. I think there's a couple of things around that. Firstly, I think over the long term, we'll see change over time. I think it's a little bit too early to tell how the Cambridge Analytica scandal will unfold for Facebook. We've seen a lot of people come to us as a result of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, but even before that as well, who were quite uneasy about the role of technology in their lives and the role of companies like Facebook and Google, Amazon, things like that. And so what's happening is that there's a shift in the public's perception of uh, how these existing structure of these platforms actually affects their lives. And so, although we might not see major changes today, over time, especially based on the experiences and the feedback that we have through outreach and through awareness raising, over time there could be significant shifts in how people relate to these companies and how people relate to their devices and their platforms. With the Data Detox Kit in particular, what we're seeing is people coming to the Data Detox Kit and with these kind of unformed questions, this sort of general unease that they can't quite put their finger on, or a general sense that they need to change something in their lives regarding Facebook and Google, but no real way to start to make that change. And so the Data Detox Kit is really designed for people who need these services, because we don't really think that people should delete these services outright. It's up to the individual. It's up to your needs. They do play vital roles in our lives, Facebook and Google. But what we try to do is encourage people to examine the relationships that they have with these companies and make very informed decisions around what they choose to share with these companies when they're interacting with them.
That's great. So, Cade, let's now switch the spotlight back onto you, and particularly your journey to be working in ethical tech more generally, because this is a topic that has only recently become more fashionable and more newsworthy. So what drew you to be working in this field?
Yeah, so my background is I'm a user experience researcher and a designer. I've had nearly 10 years worth of experience in the field. After several years of, it was almost like a Silicon Valley outsider, shuttling back and forth between San Francisco and Australia. I started to, as I was working in the early stage App Store works as a designer, working on products for various clients around the world, I was doing all of this work and commuting against the backdrop of really large stories in the early, sort of say 2011 onwards period of this digital mobile computing revolution. And the backdrop of of my work consisted of lots of stories about government surveillance and data breaches and really user hostile scandals. And what increasingly happened was I was feeling quite outraged about my work and how I was receiving briefs from clients to work on products and make people trust them. But at the same time, not necessarily the clients that I had, but in a general sense, there seemed to be very little being done at the time to really lock that user data down or secure it, or indeed take into account government surveillance and things like that. And so over time, I got quite disillusioned with that particular form of design in technology, a sort of unquestioning look at the systems that we were designing, especially since they were being weaponized against people on a daily basis, whether through hacks or through abuse of the system, things like that. And so in 2014, I worked with Open Whisper Systems on a prototype for Signal, and that was a catalyst of getting into a form of design that was very informed and collaborative with information security. From there, I became the creative director of SpiderOak, which is a end-to-end encrypted. They have a collaboration app and a backup app for storing, like a Dropbox kind of app that end-to-end encrypted. And then from there, I sort of started to realize that just adding information security to design wasn't quite enough. And so I joined Tactical Tech last year and moved to Berlin from Australia, primarily to research the effects of design on the politics of all of the technology that we experience today, and also to lend my experience as a user experience researcher to this work, such as within the Data Detox Kit, around awareness raising and advising people on ways in which they can become better informed about technology.
So, Cade, as you were speaking just then, you used this phrase in passing called user hostile design, and that sounds really intriguing. So can you tell us what that is exactly, how we would find it and also its implications for society.
Right. So, user hostile design, or a term that I've been using a lot lately, is weaponized design. Is a form of it's a phenomenon that occurs when a an interface or a systems architecture uh, harms its users, not through a hack or anything that breaks the system, but rather through its intended behavior. So the idea here is that users of a system are participating. It could be a social media platform, it could be a photo sharing service. It doesn't really matter the context, but within the constraints of the design system that a design team and an engineering team puts together, and either the company itself or an outside influence or even another user is able to use the system within its rules to actively harm other people. Some good examples of this are things like the iCloud photo hack, in which a couple of years ago, when Apple started syncing everybody's photo libraries to the cloud, there were targeted attacks against women to expose their private photos online through this iCloud backup service. And this is an example of weaponized design, not because of the hack itself, but rather that there was no consent given, informed consent given by people using their iPhone devices or iOS devices to people. The trade-off that the design team at Apple were making were that people needed their photos on the cloud so that if they lost their device or it was stolen or if it was destroyed, that they would have access to treasured memories and things like that. However, that is not the only reason people use their phones. There's a phone in particular is quite an intimate device for a lot of people. And so this idea that people would blanket give consent put a lot of people, a lot of users in this sort of precarious position, which then, of course, backfired spectacularly once people were able to get into these accounts. It's also worth noting that the accounts themselves were the result of it. The hack itself was the result of social engineering attacks rather than actually breaking any form of encryption. So what you had is this system that was not quite as secure as it could have been, and didn't have all of the protections in place at the time. And then essentially people didn't even realize that these photos were available somewhere else that wasn't their device. And so when when this hack occurred, it actually was quite traumatic for a lot of people. Another example would be Facebook's year in review concept, where the company at the end of the year publishes an algorithmically generated celebration of your year at the top of your timeline. Historically, this has been quite a traumatic experience for a lot of people, because in many cases, and there's screenshots and a lot of writing about this online, where the algorithm has picked very traumatic events, and then the design of the actual widget within the Facebook newsfeed presents it in a celebratory light. And so you have this juxtaposition, this traumatic juxtaposition of people who have posted photos of their houses burning down or of a loved one dying, things like that. And it is then presented to the user in this way that makes it seem like they've had a good year. And in that case, the design has been weaponized through an algorithm. But what's happened here is that the consideration of the design team has put into the product doesn't account for a wide range of lived experiences that aren't the ideal situation or that don't fit the ideal user. And so the research that I'm doing at Tactical Tech around weaponized design is kind of looking at ways in which design teams, through internal biases or trade-off during the conceptualization phase, or through direct weaponization, where they work internally with other groups within the team or the business itself to kind of manipulate users. It's looking at those kinds of phenomena and finding very good examples of that, and then looking to develop alternate practices within design to see if we can start to mitigate these, especially in areas where we don't necessarily have lived experiences to inform our decisions as designers for these, products that work at immense scale.
So, Cade, we've spoken on an individual level just how damaging weaponized design can be, but I'm wondering at a more macro level, how does this type of design really impact society? And I think perhaps more importantly, what are some of the impacts that this would have on society in the long term?
I think that these experiences that I've sort of listed on a personal level can be quite traumatic for people, and in many ways have actually, for lots of people who have experienced these kinds of things, it actually changes the way that they look at technology altogether, and they become quite distrustful of their devices, which is not exactly it's actually a really terrible thing to happen. Outside of that, though, a classic example, outside of that, though, a really good example of how weaponized design can affect us on a societal level is, in fact, the Cambridge Analytica scandal. A few months before that scandal was published and the news broke about what was going on between Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, the design team working on Facebook newsfeed published an article as part of their Facebook design communication describing some of the changes that they'd made within the Facebook newsfeed algorithm with the sole purpose of keeping people engaged for longer. So they'd made small tweaks with the metric that they'd made small tweaks to the project, the interface, with the goal of making it more engaging, where the metrics that they were being measured against for success were people staying on the newsfeed longer, interacting with the newsfeed longer, sharing things with other people more frequently, and things like that. So the argument could be made that that those tweaks that were made to the system facilitates or helped to facilitate, not as one item, but as a series of examples like this coming together to help a company like Cambridge Analytica and any user account that would participate in that particular manipulation around fake news or data scraping or things like that. That new design really helps those kinds of actors as they develop and push for the kinds of outcomes that they want. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I think this is just a really concerning topic for everyone that uses any kind of digital experience. But I think kind of, of course, we've been talking about everything at a kind of very high level. We've been talking about the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal. But I wonder if we can just bring it down to people's everyday lives, and particularly, how would people know when their behavior is being designed or when they're encountering weaponized design? What does that look like to people just on an everyday level?
Yes. So I mean, there's a number of different ways. In the early I think it was around 2012. I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head, but a few years ago, the Facebook data science team published a report manipulating user emotions by serving people more positive or more negative content to their Facebook news feeds. And this research was done without the consent of people. And the design team is complicit in this because they're designing a system that can then be used by people in the data science team to conduct this kind of research, right? So outside of the political scope, there were experiments done at Facebook to sort of manipulate people's emotions directly, actually, directly affect their emotional state, and then measure the impact that the interface combined with the content could have on an individual. Outside of that, there's other examples like that pose significant personal safety threats. For example, last year, Snapchat rolled out a feature called Snap Maps, and Snap Map shows every person who you are a mutual contact with on Snapchat your location, right down to the nearest 10 meters or however close the GPS can get you. Now, the issue with this is that the design team in this instance considered your Snapchat friends to be people that you would interact with on a regular basis, or people that you at least trust in some respect. But the problem is that Snapchat is used by a whole variety of different people. It's used for everything from commerce through to comedians, through to cam models, through to celebrities. All sorts of people were using Snapchat. And what was happening was this thing was inadvertently broadcasting their location to potentially hundreds of thousands of people without really having the full consent of the person who was actually posting on Snapchat. So you have this issue where it's not just about the actual designers itself, but also this seemingly this practice within design teams to reduce the amount of consent that a user has to give in order for these things to happen. Or in many cases, the consent that you give you're not really able to, because you don't know the system very well, because you're not privy to the entirety of the implications of giving consent. You don't really have the ability to give informed consent. Things might change over time. You might be in one state of mind when you're using a service, and then not realize the dangers of it later down the track, things like that. So in terms of sort of everyday use, there's everything from using design to manipulate people's emotions, all the way through to design that, through blind spots within the design team, can actually cause real physical risks to users. Some more examples are things like early Gmail, when Gmail integrated GChat into the sidebar back in the late noughts. It was doing things like leaking lawyer and client relationships to other parties, or exposing the email addresses and phone numbers of estranged spouses and things like that. So this idea for the address book is a really common example. So services that require your phone number to sign up and identify with can then be used to find you on various networks. And then so there's, as I said, there's all sorts of examples of this that cover a wide variety of the technologies that we use today, that not just manipulate us in very subtle ways, but also can in many cases present physical danger in individual circumstances.
So if weaponized design is all around us, and you say is affecting all of us all of the time, what steps would you say that people should be taking to protect themselves against unwanted behavior design?
So it's really there's two sides to it. So the first side is that we must, as designers, we must produce alternate practices. And there are many disciplines that we can look at from that. So for example, designers, I believe, should look towards, if you're a designer in a product team, you should look towards your product teams or your business's security team, because in many cases, the product team and the security team are actually working in opposite ways on the same kinds of goals. You know, a product team is designing a good user experience to keep people in a product, and a security team is designing a terrible user experience to keep people out. The goals are actually the opposite, but in fact should employ very similar strategies. And so I think that stronger collaboration outside of the design field can really help with building better design. There's also other concepts that we can borrow from. Participatory design, for example, is one where we start to look, rather than looking at ideal users or user personas, where we kind of strip away the interactions between users and the lived social political context of the users within a system. We can start looking at people and how they interact, not just between us as designers and our products, but also between each other, or even people who don't actually use the product, and those relationships there. A lot of work has been done over the past 20 or 30 years in massive multiplayer online games, for example, where designers of these systems are not just thinking about a game's interface, but also how gamers within their worlds actually interact with other players. And so those kinds of discussions can then open up a much greater sense of what's available, what the opportunities are, what the potential for conflict or danger could be, things like that. So I think that from the design perspective, there's a number of things that we can do. As a user, the simplest things that we can do is to start critically evaluating the services that we use. Things like, should I put my phone number in this? What are the privacy settings that I can turn on to keep myself private? Can I trust really what I'm reading all the time? Like if I'm seeing the same things come up repeatedly that reinforce my belief systems, what does this mean? Also, just looking at the amount of data that you share and trying to limit the amount that big platforms have on you. In many ways, the Data Detox Kit is the user response to some of the work that I've been doing in weaponized design. So the idea here is that you look very closely at whether Google is your best friend, for example, and what you share with Google. Would you share that with your best friend? And so the Data Detox Kit is like a really nice starting point for people who are beginning to worry a little bit about these kinds of concepts and want to do something concrete and tangible about them.
That's amazing. I think that's a really great segue because I really want to know more about the data detox, how it works, and particularly, I know as you mentioned that the data detox really was a response to all of the work that you've been doing on weaponized designs. The two are really nicely linked. But what is it exactly, and how does it work?
So the data detox kit has been around for a couple of years. It was actually a part of an earlier project at Tactical Tech, and then became it was developed hand in hand with it was developed hand in hand with another Tactical Tech project called the Glassroom. So the Glassroom is an installation that has been held in New York and in London, and it explores the role of data and big data companies in society through a number of workshops and talks, installation pieces, videos, and lots of engaging things as an exhibition. And so when people come into this and they start to understand the roles of facial recognition and data collection and how radios in their phones can be used to track them across the city, things like this, as they start to think about the scale of the economics of data brokerage and how the internet actually works, they start to sort of immediately think, well, what can I do about this? And so the data detox kit is really the first step in that. It's an 8-day process. You can print an offline copy, or you can do it online. And essentially, it goes, each day focuses on a specific area, whether it's Facebook or Google specifically, whether it's your device and the kinds of application permissions that you've given to the various things that you have installed on your phone, to things like figuring out what people know about you as you browse around the web, how ad companies track you, things like that. And so across the board, it gives you multiple steps. The first step is to an exploration and a discovery phase, where you go through some of these services and you start to critically reflect upon what they know about you and whether that's okay or not. And then the second part of it is this action, where you yourself pick what you're comfortable with, and then it gives you the tools to help to delete or otherwise lessen your data footprint online. And so what we see with this is that because each day takes about 15 minutes and can be done at your own leisure, people tend to come in and either do it in one giant block, or they take a week, 2 weeks, and they go through it on a more relaxed basis. But in many cases, the outcomes have been that people are able to talk a little bit more about, with a little bit more confidence around the roles of data and platforms in their lives, and how they feel about it and how they can respond to that. And so at the end of it, even though it's only really a first step, it helps to really add a foundational layer to some of the anxieties that people have around these services and tech in general.
I think this is great, Cade, and this is certainly something that anyone who's concerned about how their data is being used and how their behavior is being tracked online, they should definitely do this data detox. But because the process lasts 8 days, I'm really interested to know if you can share any stories of people that have gone through this and then incorporated anything else into their daily lives. What do people do after these 8 days?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we have really unexpected results. For example, one of the most enthusiastic groups of people are more elderly, so 65 plus, the older groups of people who take to this and really understand it in a concrete way. But it's not just that target. It's just one of the sort of interesting side effects of this work. Across the board, we're seeing lots of engagement with this, and there's things that have happened, particularly in Europe, that really have helped to drive this at the same time. So, for example, the General Data Protection Regulation that came into effect in May has had a big influence on people taking notice, both through the media and also some of the letters and emails that they would have received from companies around the use of their data. So that kind of brought this whole industry and this whole role of data in people's lives to the forefront. And so we're seeing, as I mentioned before, 65s plus tend to use it and have good experiences with it. We've started to see anecdotally, a colleague of mine was doing a training with some high schoolers digital security training with some high schoolers and discovered that a whole not insignificant number of them had started reading the terms of privacy for the services that they use, because they were legally, the companies legally were required to push this in front of their faces. And so as they started reading some of them, there was a discussion. What was originally meant to be a very sort of, this is why you should care and things like that, suddenly became this discussion around like, wow, I didn't know how many advertising companies Tumblr partners with, for example, and things like that. So we have these sorts of anecdotes that are alongside, the evaluations that we do both ourselves and through some of our partners that kind of see that, kind of give us a good understanding of where things are trending. Some of the other things is that on the 8th day of the data detox kit, it does leave you with this repeatable thing that you can do, where it gives you a very basic set of instructions based on also what you've learned from the previous 7 days to go out and look at other accounts that you might have and make assessments on them. We're also working on a new version of the data detox kit alongside constantly revising the data detox kit called the Immune Booster, which once people are comfortable with this kind of understanding of how platforms collect user data, it then takes it a step further and introduces new concepts around information security, password management, accounts hardening, dealing with online harassment, things like that. So there's actually a progression that we're working on over the next couple of years that cover the entire range of security, online safety, and empowerment of users around consent and protection and self-protection. So we're really sort of this part of really excited about this, because it's the part of the tactical tech work alongside our other projects that is the most publicly facing. And so it tends to, we're seeing really interesting results to start with, and there's a lot planned in the future as well.
Okay, this all sounds fantastic. Where can people go to find out much more about this and about you, connect with Tactical Tech, and also download this data detox kit?
Yeah, so the Tactical Tech's website is tacticaltech.org. The data detox kit is at datadetox.myshadow.org. It's available right now in English and Spanish, but very shortly we'll be launching Portuguese, French, and German as well. So it'll be available in 5 languages, which is really exciting. We have a series of offline versions. So if you visit the Data Detox website and you contact us, we have offline versions that you can either order through us. We send stuff out to people, or there's other versions that you can print yourself and then distribute. That's available in more than 5 languages. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but we have translated it into a wide variety of languages. So yeah, it's available whether you're offline or online. It's available to do by yourself, or if you want to do it with a group of people, or if you have an event around digital security or awareness around data and privacy that you want to attend or that you're hosting. So there's a number of ways that you can get involved with the Data Detox Kit, and it kind of we're very sort of accommodating around those kinds of things.
This is really fantastic, Cade, and I want to thank you guys so much for making all of this publicly available, and that people can just take this data detox and learn more about the ways that their behaviors and their data are just being used online, and just making all of this freely available. So thank you very much for your work, but also thank you for coming on to the show with us today and spending some time with us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate coming on. This is a fantastic podcast.